Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome back for another live broadcast with me, your host, Kev Baker, coming to you live from Smart City, Glasgow. And I know I've made that bit of my shtick every night when I come in now. I always introduce it as Smart City, Glasgow. And tonight we're going to be delving deep into the heart of the Smart City, Glasgow, and the Smart City topic in general. This is a show that I've been really looking forward to since we put it together, maybe just a week or so ago, because these are all of the topics that we really like to dig into here on the show. The surveillance state, 5G, the Internet of Things, all of the data collection and how it affects all of our lives. And tonight, we really are going to be diving deep down this rabbit hole. And I'm sitting here smiling because we've got one of the best guests imaginable to come on and talk to us about all of these topics. And right now, everything from our music tastes and our shopping habits to our faces and our fingerprints, it's up for grabs in the business of big data. But who exactly owns this data? How will it be used? And what impact will this ever-increasing digital footprint have on our lives? Now, these are probably questions that if we aren't already asking, we really should be asking of ourselves. And it's also the questions that tonight's guest, Pippa King, started asking as well. And Pippa is a music teacher, a housewife, a mother, and a privacy crusader. Pippa campaigns against intrusions into children's privacy in education. Now, from 1999 until 2013, schools in the UK had been taking children's biometric data without consultation or consent from parents. Since Pippa became aware of this, she has campaigned relentlessly against schools using children's biometrics and for parents to have openness and transparency on the use of their children's data. Now, as a result of lobbying MPs, the Protection of Freedoms Act 2012 was passed in May 2012, which requires that schools must now gain written parental consent if they wish to store and process a child's biometric data. Pippa continues to raise awareness of the wider implications on adult society with biometrics and RFID technology, pushing for debate and transparency. Now, Pippa is the author of Biometrics in Schools and Against RFID in Schools, and they are both blogs that so far haven't been taken down, but in this world of Orwell's censorship, who knows? Pippa, welcome back to the show. Can you hear me, Pippa?
Kevin, I'm hearing about 60%.
Well, hopefully you can see me as well now. I've started sharing screens, so we're all here. We're good. And I know you couldn't really hear very much of what I was saying, but I was basically talking about big data and who knows who owns the data, how it'll be used, and what impact it will have, the ever-increasing digital footprint have on our lives. Now, I took that straight from your TEDx talk, and I was saying to the audience how impressed I was to see how far you had come, because we've spoke before on the show, and I remember you were really, really nervous, and then to see you speaking to all these thousands of people at TEDx, how did that come about, Pippa?
Oh, golly. It was if you know BBC Click on the BBC News channel, it was a sort of freelance journalist from there had done a talk in Glasgow, and the TEDx people had sort of said, well, we haven't, we've got an event in June and we haven't really got enough speakers to speak. Apparently they'd sort of do like an X Factor audition and people come in and sort of do their pitch to TEDx, and they hadn't really managed to get enough people. So this reporter said, well, why don't you try Pippa King? So I had a telephone call and I had to do like a tiny little audition. And they said, come and talk. And so I was like, gosh, a bit petrified, really. But you don't turn down a TED talk, do you? So I had to speak for about 8 minutes, completely unprompted in front of 2,000 people. It was terrifying.
You see, I can absolutely feel your pain there. I mean, we have got thousands of people listening right now, but it's so different, right? Because, I
Yeah.
mean, you can't see them. And I've often said to the listeners, if there was even 5 of them physically in the room with me, it would make me feel sick if I had to give a presentation to them. So my hat is off to you. You've done a wonderful job. And I really want to get into what it is you were talking about there, sleepwalking into surveillance state. Because I was saying to some of my American friends, I was saying this is where you'll get to see just how much of a police state we are. It's not as obvious as America that their police departments have tanks and things from Iraq, and it looks like a
Mm.
war zone. But over here, Pippa, it's a surveillance state, as you call it, but it's almost invisible. A lot of people don't even see it forming around them.
Well, I think one of the reasons that is because we're desensitized to the surveillance that we've got. We are one of the countries that has the most CCTV cameras, and they've been up for the best part of, I'm guessing, 20 years. And so, we don't give them a second glance now, and they've slowly been coming down and down, sort of to about 8 foot rather than sort of 10 to 12 foot, because when they were going up, people were vandalizing them, especially traffic cameras. But we're sort of desensitized to that. So, and it's the technology behind those cameras that's changing subtly. They're becoming high definition in preparation for other technologies that can go behind it. So, for example, in Glasgow, I mean, your streets ahead of the rest of us in England, because we have police using mobile vans with CCTV cameras on to do facial recognition. Well, you've actually got it in Glasgow behind 70 of your 422 CCTV cameras in the city, and that's not yet been switched on, but that's capable of tracking people across the city. It's capable of identifying people with certain clothing, glasses. And so Glasgow are quite keen to say, well, we're not using facial recognition. But what they are using is facial detection, basically, beard, glasses, oh, this face looks like this. We're not recognizing it as somebody. That's not John Smith, but that's the person of interest. So it's really a play on words. They have the technology's there. They're just it's just not being used for that at the moment, or not intended to be used for that. But I'm certain
Well,
that
on the Glasgow, on like the Smart City Glasgow website, that friendly kind of interface you have with the Borg, as I call it, they dress that very software package up. They flip it around and they tell the public, what is it? What if your child goes missing and your child's wearing a yellow jacket? And then we're able to trace where your child in the yellow jacket's been all day. And from that, it gives us so many percentage of an extra chance of saving the child. So you can see how they take the technology and they sell it to the public. Yeah, sure, it can be used for that. But in reality, it's going to be used against all of us. And we're all basically being treated like criminals, Pippa, right?
Yeah, it's like it turns Glasgow into an open air prison, effectively. I mean, I got this, which is the public space CCTV video analytics directory, sort of telling people how to use, employees of Glasgow, how to use the system for when it is switched on. And the capabilities of the system, it has a number of functionalities depending on what license is utilized. We don't yet know what licenses are. Perimeter breaches, so it can basically geofence an area and check if people are going over that perimeter. Intrusion detection, so whatever that means. Crowd management or overcrowding alerts, so that they're looking at footfall, riots, protests, that sort of thing, and also loitering. So there's a whole load of alerts there that it's not
What
just sort
constitutes
of
loitering? Is there some specific time limit? And what
it's
if you're
not
just...
even illegal to
I
loiter.
was going to say, what crime are you committing,
Yeah, you could be waiting for somebody. So it said the standard video analytics require perimeters or zones to be established, which, when breached, will send the operator an alert to monitor or review. Then it says they can track incidents which involved antisocial behaviour. But what's defined as antisocial behaviour? That's such a woolly term. Antisocial behaviour for one person may not be antisocial behaviour for another. Quite a lot of people are relaxed about how people protest or what people do on a rowdy night out. So it's a very open to interpretation. So it says incident tracking involving antisocial behaviour could be located via cameras, but they're not going to live track or retrospectively view. What are they going to do?
So
They
what is
can't
the
live
point of
track
it then?
it.
Yeah, what's the point of it?
I know, and they can't respectively view something. What is it you're actually intending to do with this system? I mean, I had to go to the Information Commissioner who oversees the Freedom of Information Act to get this out of Glasgow, because they initially weren't going to give it to me.
You know what this is,
So,
Pippa? Just listening to this here, you know, this is where they're taking literally the human out of the loop, right? Because it's going straight, I would imagine, into AI then. Because if it's
yeah.
not been watched in lifetime with human eyes and the humans aren't able to go back and look again, then this sounds like it's totally designed as an information pipe right to the AI.
Yeah, it will be artificial intelligence. There's no way that you can have operators looking at those 70 cameras or the 422 cameras. They'll be set up. So I went to go and see a similar type of company who does use retrospective viewing and has exactly the same type of system. So they're looking at people, what they're wearing. You know, have you seen this item somewhere? Have you seen, you know, this type of action like running or something? And so they were really kind and they were quite transparent. And I got invited to sort of have a chat to them about potential privacy breaches. And they said, listen, facial detection, you know, whether it looks at your face and recognizes you or whether it looks at whether you've got glasses, as far as a computer is concerned, it's looking at a set of pixels. And it's just, if the pixels behave in a certain way, then the alert comes in. So whether it's a face, a suitcase, a car, a registration number, it's not looking at anything to do with us particularly. Obviously, it is us, but as far as that computer is concerned, it's pixel related. So really, the boundaries of what it's capable of is limitless. And certainly, if by saying, well, anything that's classed as antisocial behaviour, we can switch the system on, who's setting those parameters? You know, it's whoever's watching the camera. And I think the thing is, we've got this sort of technology, and you know, if I had a 6-year-old child and it went missing, I'd be hammering at the operations centre's door to get them to find it.
Exactly.
But it's the intention, it's who's asking the questions and for what reason are they doing it. Certainly, Edinburgh City Council were looking at a similar sort of system. And the councillors there, as you said, we want to monitor protests because that's where the Scottish Parliament is. We want to see who's there. We want to see the type of protest. And
at least they were open about it. Yeah, at least they were honest about it. Now, one part of your talk that you gave to TEDx, and it ties in with all of this, and I thought it was brilliant the way you done it. And it's basically from the minute we wake up in the morning, we're leaving a data trail. So somebody's getting our data. Could you go over that for the audience?
Yes. So we were talking about digital exhaust and data trails, and I sort of made the point that even before you can wake up, you know, 1 second past midnight, you can start to leave a data trail on, say, a sleep app, or if you're wearing a Fitbit, it's logging how you sleep, your heart rate, how you move in bed. And then I sort of went on to say, you know, even before we've got out of bed, and I'm guilty of this, and I'm sure an awful lot of your listeners are, you sort of reach over to your phone and think, oh, I'll just see what the weather's like before I go to work, or I'll have a quick gaze at the news. And I use my phone as a radio, so I'm listening to internet radio on it when I get up, and also, you know, it acts as an alarm clock. So this little device that I now use as a television, radio, I use it to check my email, news, social media, weather. It then comes with me and it tracks me all the way. You know, I've got basically this little recording, this spyware, which is my phone, and it knows where the human that's attached to it, me, is every night when I go to sleep. I mean, unless I switch it off, which I quite often do, I'll put it on aeroplane mode. But even then, I'm not convinced that there's not still some tracking going on. I've sort of seen information that sort of suggests that, and that was the sort of point I was making. But you know, that's my choice, and I do make a choice to use my phone for that, and I am careful with my phone. But I was sort of making the point that there's data that we don't have a choice about. Like in England, in the UK, we have something called police ANPR, which is automatic number plate recognition. It's one of the biggest ones in the world. They won't disclose how many cameras they've got, but they log something like 3 million car journeys a day in our small country, and they hang on to that data for longer than necessary. And so as soon as you get in a car in the UK, your journey's being tracked by this huge sort of camera system. And then the CCTV cameras, there's your loyalty card. If you're in London or one of the big cities, you've got travel cards that are issued. I mean, you can't get anywhere in London now with cash. You have to use a travel card. You have to use an Oyster card. So there's all that other tracking, and assumptions can be made about us from that sort of data, because the computing power and processing power, artificial intelligence, is becoming so advanced. I mean, this is only baby steps. 10 years down the line, we're going to be in a completely different scenario. But the government's sort of using this sort of data and data from what used to be standalone databases for health, pensions, education, and health. So I said health. To profile us, and this is exactly what a couple of police forces are doing. We've got a police force in Durham which runs an artificial intelligence program to advise the police on the sort of bail times they should be giving to people they've arrested. But the sort of information they're looking at isn't just government information. They're looking at whether or not you lived in a cramped household, or how few qualifications you've got, and how many hours of telly you watch a week. Now, that's not data the government has. That's data that we sort of gave innocently to marketing companies maybe 5-10 years ago, or maybe even doing it now. And they've sold it to the police.
Yeah.
The police are judging how criminal you are, based on how many hours of telly you watch a week.
And I think you were even saying about, is it the West Midlands? We often talk about pre-crime and predicting who's going to be the criminals, but I think you even said that they're even predicting who the victims of crime are likely to be. Now, this starts to show you just how much information they're gathering on all of us, because that way it's fed into quantum computers and algorithms, and this is exactly why it starts predicting the future. This is quite scary. It really is when you start to look beneath the surface, Pippa.
Yes, I mean they're using, well, possibly could be using prescription data. I don't know if that's actually right, but that was reported in one of the big newspapers, national newspapers over here. So if you're on antidepressants or something like that, or you have mental health problems, you could be flagged up as a potential criminal. And in actual fact, this is exactly what the Met Police did on Remembrance Day last November. They were running facial technology, and they have a sort of a threat database of people that have been active on social media, threatening to be violent towards either certain politicians or royal family members. But these people haven't committed any crime. They've just simply vocalized their opinion on social media. The police have then got a database or a list of these people. So what they were doing at Remembrance Day last November the 11th, I think it was, at the Cenotaph, where we remember the end of the Second World War, they were scanning crowds to see if those people were in the crowds. They hadn't committed any crimes. They were just fishing. They were on a fishing expedition for data, basically. And so yeah, you're absolutely right. We could find ourselves flagged on a database. I mean, these people are obviously flagged on a database, and they probably don't even know that they are flagged on a database for something we haven't done, or flagged because we might do something, or we might be a victim. And this is the data that they've got on us isn't complete. There's an awful lot more to us than our digital exhaust. I mean, increasingly that's becoming more and more detailed about us if we choose it to be. But if you're not using too much social media, I just wonder if they'll flag you for that, saying, "Well, she's off social media. She's not got an email address. What's she up to?" So what do you do? Did you sort of comply and take part in the system, or do you decide to limit your footprint and then become flagged anyway?
Damned if you do.
I have read EU reports on RFID tagging people with radio frequency devices, and they were sort of making the observation that the ones that you really want to be watching are the ones that aren't compliant with the technology.
You're damned if you do, and you're damned if you don't. Now, we're almost on the break, and we'll come back. We'll get right back into it, folks, with Pippa King. Don't go anywhere. Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen. Second segment of today's Kev Baker Show. We're getting into the surveillance state. All of our data trails that we leave behind us, who's controlling them and how are they used against us. And to do all of this, I'm speaking to Pippa King, and Pippa was recently speaking at a TEDx talk, and she is here. She's live with us today. Pippa, where can people keep up to date with your work? I've got one website up here, pippaking.blogspot.com. Is there any others out there?
Yeah, that's specifically to do with biometrics in schools, which is why I'm sort of talking to you. My children were nearly fingerprinted back in 2004, and when they were 6 and 7. So I spotted the scanner in the library and asked the head teacher when she was going to ask my permission, and she just said, "I don't need your permission to fingerprint your kids." Like, really?
Wow.
So I got really concerned about that, obviously, and spent, to cut a long story short, from 2004 to 2010, there was a group of parents, maybe about 6 or 7 of us, and were helped by Privacy International and No2ID, which were groups over here, privacy groups, and we lobbied Parliament for debate and some decision about, obviously, a 6 and 7-year-old's biometrics needs to be secure for the next sort of 6-7 decades. And we got legislation passed in 2012. It's the only legislation that applies on a national level to children in education and processing the biometrics. So there are some states in the USA that have similar legislation: Wisconsin, Illinois, Michigan, I think. Florida have banned the use of biometrics in schools after accidentally iris scanning about 900 children and didn't tell the parents. So
accidentally, with the air quotes there, accidentally on purpose.
Yeah. So the lovely Senator Dorothy Hookhill, who's sadly passed away, put a bill through actually banning the use of biometrics completely in schools in Florida. So in schools we have, or in the States, they have facial recognition, but generally the biometrics that are used in schools are fingerprints. It seems to be the sort of easiest biometric of choice, but they're sort of trying to introduce facial recognition to keep kids safe from violence in schools with shooters. How the technology can do that is beyond me. But so that particular website just deals with biometrics, and then I have an Against RFID in Schools website, because they do the same thing in the States. They tag children with active radio frequency chips in tags around their necks to see where they are in school, who they're hanging out with.
You know what this is really sounding to me like? It sounds like they're actually programming the children. Much like when we were growing up, we would see CCTV cameras going up, and it would be a talking point. Everyone would be pointing at them. They'd be some people throwing rocks at them. But then, like you said, over time, you become accustomed to it. You really don't notice them anymore. And I think that's what we're seeing in the schools, because, like you say, it's ridiculous to think any of this can protect and keep children safer. So it's for another reason, and I think it's to get them ready for a world where data is going to be king.
Absolutely. I mean, we were in England and in the UK, we sort of pioneered the testing of biometrics in schools. We had facial recognition, fingerprint, infrared palm scanning, iris scanning, and then the US sort of followed on. But in the US, they're testing other things on children. So I have a biometrics in school website. Then I have something called RFID in schools, again covering the radio frequency chipping agenda with the children. And then I have another website called State of Surveillance, which sort of deals in generally with the general public. And so 2 things they're doing in the States that we're not having in the UK, partly because of the legislation that we lobbied Parliament for, is they're trialing what's called millimeter microwave scanners. So this is the same or similar technology to TSA scanners that you see at airports, that you walk through and then it'll like beep, 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 you've got something on you that is not authorized. So a British company funded with research from taxpayers, so we're responsible for this, at Manchester Metropolitan University, have got sort of dinner-sized plate scanners that will beam exactly sort of a similar type of technology into crowds of people, and it will identify whether people are carrying guns or bomb vests. It was designed because the Home Office over here was concerned about the printing of 3D plastic guns. So potentially a gun wouldn't show up on a metal detection scanner. So they wanted to develop a technology that could detect shapes. So it's being tested in Seattle at the moment. There's details on the state of surveillance website there, but it's also being tested in a Texan school. Well, it was going to be tested in a Texan high school. Now, Texas have an open carry policy with guns, I believe. So, if they were going to test it on the children. So I sent the school a Freedom of Information Act request to see if they were going to tell the parents they were going to zap their kids with 95 to 110 gigahertz worth of, radiation. And the school said, no, we're not going to do that. We're just going to test it. So I was like, what happens if a mother goes into school and she's got a small firearm in a handbag, as she's absolutely every right to do? They're in Texas. She's allowed to do that. Are the school going to SWAT team her? What about a groundsman who's maybe got a knife on him just to do his job? And this technology is there and it can identify people like that. But what do you do then with that information? At what point do you make a decision that this person is a threat? And then I suppose the question is, well, why don't we have it in school buses too? Because a shooter isn't going to, if it knows that technology is in a school, it's going to perpetrate its crime on a school bus. Right, okay, well, let's put it on the school bus as well. And then they would think, well, maybe we need it to outside events, school trips. And at that point, you're sort of scanning the general public. It's madness. And again, it's kids that are getting tested with this. And I only found out 2 days ago that they're testing in quite a few US schools sound. So if there's anomalies of sound, like aggression or somebody screaming or gunshots, an alarm will be set. And again, it's all artificial intelligence. It's not humans that are listening in on this. It's computer programs, but they're testing it on the children. And I think you're right. I saw the fingerprinting of my 6 and 7-year-old as desensitizing them to think, oh, actually, if I want food from a canteen, or if I want knowledge from a library book, or I want permission to go in this particular area, they need my fingerprint. That's a fair exchange of data. You give me food, I give you my fingerprint. It doesn't work like that. That's not how we operate. And certainly No 2 ID, which were a group against the introduction of biometric ID cards about 10 years ago, saw what the government were doing with the introduction of this type of technology in schools when no other part of society was using it. We didn't even have it on our phones at that point in time. Completely saw it as desensitizing the next generation, because their attitude was, No 2 ID's attitude was, well, if the government's not successful in getting biometric ID cards through now, they've only got to wait 15 years, 20 years, and the next generation's like, yeah, take my fingerprint, take my facial scan, it's going to keep me safe. And it's not. And I do see it as a desensitizing agenda. And I've not even talked about homework applications. So the whole school system. And if you go and look at the ed tech industry, which covers all sorts, we're talking biometrics, home to school applications for sending homework in, they will gladly and gleefully tell you that section of society is the most data mined section of society. Our children are data mined like no other section of society. I mean, Google doesn't even come close to some of the data the edtech companies can take off your kids. They know.
And I think that ties in with that thing you were talking about there, this generation. It's a generational thing. When this generation leaves school, they really are going to be the first generation that's going to be controlled directly by the data that they're leaving behind. And I think the closer they can get to know the child, map them, profile them, look at their behaviors, younger and younger, and that's happening all the time. That increases the kind of what they know about them by the time they do go into the working world. It's a really clever and scary system.
Absolutely. I mean, they start looking at children as in UK, in England, children potentially hit the education system at the age of 2.
Yeah.
And there was some talk a couple of years ago about tagging these 2-year-olds with RFID identification tags, so they can sort of see their movement and what they're playing with more than other children. And It's frightening. And what we were talking about, West Midlands police sort of profiling us as victims, this has been happening certainly in the UK education system for some time. So there's concerns about a child. Maybe they look a bit underweight, or they're a little bit tired when they come into school, or the homework quality suddenly dips. I mean, there's many reasons for all of those things. A flag will go on that child, like, watch this child, it might be getting abused, when maybe it is. It's very, very rare that children are abused, but suddenly your child could have a flag in it, and there's nothing wrong with it. It just could be having a growing spurt. Certainly teenagers, there's a whole load of chemicals that go on inside teenage bodies. So to start sort of highlighting, I mean, schools should rightly look out for danger signs, but whether or not that should be put on a database, because once it's on that database, that information isn't going to come off it. I think a human to human, just like, are you okay? Is everything all right? Is a really useful thing to have, but it's like you say, it's artificial intelligence that's sort of looking at this, and especially things like the homework app is telling me that this child handed this homework in at 11:30 at night, and they're only 11 years old. What are they doing? Let's flag it. There might be something going on at home there, because that child was on a computer outside hours that we think are acceptable. So you've got to be really careful, and I guess there's loads of parents listening to this. If you have a child that invariably is at school using a homework app, check who's getting the data, because it'll go back to probably the company that supplied it, because they want to hone their system, so the artificial intelligence that they're developing is better at setting homework or marking homework. And also check what data what the schools are doing with it, because it's not an app just for you. This is an app for the ed tech industry and the school system and the government.
It's the same as any app. Yeah, we think it's free, but nothing's for free, Pippa.
No,
even something
right.
like
It's
that.
free. You're the commodity.
Absolutely. And again, from birth almost, we're starting to leave that digital profile. They're taking data from us, and that's it started right then. Now, another part of this I want to get into today, and it's an important part of it. It links the smart cities to all of this stuff that we're talking about as well. And that's the 5G. Mm-hmm. Because 5G right now, it's dressed up, and I see Kevin Bacon on the EE advert saying that you'll be able to watch your favourite show, blah, blah, blah. But really, this is about the internet of everything and all of the data that's been produced, right?
It's not for us. 5G isn't for our benefit. It's for the benefit of the power of surveillance and connectivity that different parts of cities need to have for the powers that be that want to use the city. Now, in Glasgow and in Bristol and other smart cities we've got in the UK, it's dressed up under the green agenda. We're making it more energy efficient. We're making transport and traffic easier to get in and out of the city. In Glasgow, you've got air quality monitoring systems, you've got sound monitoring systems, you've got extra CCTV to look at traffic. It's the most heavily surveilled, and it turns the whole country or the whole city into essentially an open air prison. Especially if the system that you've got behind the CCTV cameras can set up perimeters and inclusion zones or exclusion zones.
And we've just had a 7.2 million upgrade to Sauchiehall Street here, and even the article that's waxing lyrical about all of this says that that's it all now set up for the latest smart city technology. So
it is. It's 5G. Now 5G, as I understand, hasn't been tested for health and safety. So apart from all the surveillance issues you've got with that sort of speed of communication, there's issues to do with health and safety, and not just for us, for insects, pollinators, birds. Unborn babies, we're sort of going to be using this system, and it's untested. And there have been some reports of quite serious health effects in the States where this has come out.
Okay, you mentioned birds there, and I have to say, let me kind of preface this for the audience as I've got no evidence linking these two things, okay? But we've had the trials of 5G in the area, and both myself and my son, we've often now been turning around and looking at each other when we've been out taking a walk. And the reason we're looking at each other, Pippa, is because there is an ungodly amount of dead birds lying around. Now,
Really?
this has never ever been a thing, and that's why it kind of stands out. And me and Kevin have both commented on it. And I don't know, like I say, I can't blame the technology or anything, but this is something new. It's something that hasn't been happening on this scale before. And it's not to the point where they're raining out of the sky or anything like that, but noticeably, there's dead birds lying around.
Yeah, we need to be ever so careful with the effects of increasing frequency. I mean, we're living in an electro-smog anyway, and I think in France and some, maybe Iceland, but in some of the European countries here, they've banned Wi-Fi in nurseries because it's so harmful, potentially harmful for younger humans because they have a higher water content in their body. So there's something called a SAR, which is a specific absorption rate that is sort of measured globally to see how deep into your body radiation from mobile phones and Wi-Fi can go. And the SAR ratings for young children are far higher. That the penetration into their bodies is far higher than an adult. That's, you know, it's still bad for adults, and I wouldn't recommend anybody putting a phone to their head, use it on a speaker or earphones. But so and the frequency for 5G is like, if not, it's so much higher. So mobile phones and the Wi-Fi in the UK is around about 2.4 gigahertz. And I think in other parts of Europe it can get up to 5 gigahertz. But the 5G network is using a range of frequencies, and the particular frequency where I live in London is going to be 29 gigahertz, which is, I don't know, sort of so much more than 2.4 gigahertz, 10 times more than Wi-Fi. We don't know what effect that's going to have on us at all. I mean, as it happens, this is a now disused ex-military satellite frequency. But I think the other thing as well that's happened in the UK with the sort of advent of 5G, though none of the authorities will admit to this, but is the fact they've been cutting a whole load of ancient or well-established trees down. We have lovely trees in our cities in the UK, and one city in particular, Sheffield, has felled thousands upon thousands of trees because the frequencies are so small for 5G, they're not able to travel very far, and things like wet leaves on trees disrupt the signal. So there's been a whole school of thought over here that the reason they're taking trees down, or certainly sort of making them a lot smaller. I mean, where we've lived, they've really hacked a lot of trees back, is because of preparation for 5G. And so if we're, you know, the birds are dropping out of the sky, the bees, the pollinators are becoming less, which is another issue, and we're cutting the trees down. That's not for us.
No.
There's another agenda, I think, going on there, and certainly it's surveillance. I think it's just so that the computing power and the artificial intelligence that they potentially probably have in the sidelines. Because let's face it, I think, and I'm sure you've heard this before, Kev, that the technology we see is about 30 years behind what the military and sort of secret services have. So.
Yeah.
They know what's coming down the line technology-wise, and this is they're setting up the infrastructure for what's going to be coming in the next 5, 10, 15 years.
Absolutely. Now, we know that there's a lack of independent testing, but what's the government's attitude towards 5G? Because they seem to be quite determined just to roll this out. Everything's hunky-dory.
Well, it's interesting because in the UK, we've made a decision to use part of the Chinese, I'm going to say this right, Huawei.
You're the same as me. I can't say it either. It sounds like Hawaii when I say it.
Yeah, part of their technology. And China, I think, are amazing at surveilling their people. But what they do have, and it's really interesting, I think Joseph Farrell, who's an amazing sort of US commentator, was saying that the biggest threat to the security in the West is the Chinese education system, because there's so many more Chinese people that they are very, very good at educating their young. So as the next generation of Chinese come through, they've just got, you know, thousands more engineers and scientists than we in the West can ever produce, because certainly in England our education system is not at all ranked very high globally. And certainly with Common Core in America, I wouldn't imagine theirs is either. So the Chinese technology is, I think, the best, and probably it's quite wise for the British government to be investing in the best surveillance technology. Why would you invest in your own technology if there's a better one out there? But so the whole sort of 5G issue brings up many things, and our government is sort of saying on the health side of things, well, where's the evidence to suggest it is harmful? And of course, there isn't any, because the universities and the research that's done is bought and paid for, A, by the government, or B, by the industry itself. When you look at Big Pharma, look at cigarette companies, we've got prior history on this, and in any independent research that does come out is not published in any of the sort of specialized or renowned scientific journals, because it's not towing the line. But there was a report that came out, I think, in 2012 called the Biodiversity Report, talking about the dangers of mobile phones and Wi-Fi. And there's a lot of independent sort of researchers and scientists that have contributed to that. So there is evidence out there, but because it's not got the government seal and stamp on it, then they won't accept it. They just look in the other direction. So what do we do about it? I guess I don't know. I personally take iodine, which is meant to help your body deal with all different types of frequency and radiation. Because I can switch my computer on and have a look and maybe see 10 or 15 Wi-Fi hubs that I can potentially use. And I guess you're the same, Kevin. Maybe everybody else is, but. So we've got to be really mindful and look after ourselves and ground yourself if you can get a wired, I've got, which is out at the moment because it was making our signal a little.
Yeah, it was strange.
But I use sort of a wired Ethernet or internet connection. So we just have to take as many steps as we can. But talking about the next generation, I think it's really important to, give them some consideration. We're careering headlong into this sort of world of surveillance and frequency, and we're dragging our children with us into it and desensitizing them to it. We need to be good custodians of their data, and this is partly what the TED Talk was about, and just start to take some personal responsibility about how we treat our own data. And then if we do that, then maybe the next generation will do that too. And I think let's start with the schools. Let's hold them accountable. Fingerprinting, iris scanning, facial scanning, voice testing, millimeter microwave scanning, homework apps that give whatever, more information.
Sounds like a science. It sounds more like a science experiment than an education centre.
And children, if there's any children or parents listening, start asking questions of your school and see who your children's data is shared with. I mean, certainly in the UK, you can, as a parent, make a subject access request under data protection legislation, and the school has to cough up everything they've got on your child, including, any systems they're flagged on. And you can also make that data request to the homework app company. This isn't just something you can ask local government. You can ask commercial companies, what data do you have on me? Or what data do you have on my child? So it may be worth an interesting exercise to do that, but let your child see you doing it, and let them be horrified when they realise that time or the place that they're handing their homework in is all being logged somewhere. It's not just a tool to hand your homework in. It's logging other information. And I think as well what will happen, and they try to do this in the States, is because the homework apps don't actually it could be your best friend doing it or your mum and dad. So what they tried to do, I think in San Diego, is they tried to introduce a whole load of iPads for free, because it was a test. They were testing them on the kids. And every 60 seconds, the camera in the iPad was scanning the face of the child, just to check it was still the child that was doing the homework. And the parents rightly thought this was really creepy, and it all got thrown out. But you see that on the Biometrics in Schools blog. But that's where it's going, because this artificial intelligence needs data to be as pure as possible for it to be accurate and for it to learn well. And the only way they can do that is to sort of start to biometrically connect us with our devices, which is exactly why phones have got fingerprints and facial scans now. I don't use anything like that.
No, I don't use them, but I do see a time very soon where that's going to be a form of almost internet ID. It'll be our face. We'll log in with a webcam, or we'll log in with the camera on our smart device. I see that just around the corner now. Pippa, could I keep you for 5 or 10 minutes after the break, since we lost 5 or 10 at the start?
Sorry.
No, not at all. This is I love getting into this stuff because, like you said, there might be a lot of parents out there listening. And I remember when Kevin, he had the kind of absence app, and there was the homework app, and there was this app and that app, and then even he was talking about the iPads. When you go into 5th year and 6th year over here, you get the free iPad. You take the iPad home and things like that. So that is really already happening over here now. I'm not saying they're scanning faces, but we can see that this is definitely the direction that they're taking this generation tech, as I'm going to start calling them now. And it's going to be used against us. And when we come back after the break, I'll be asking Pippa a bit more about Smart City Glasgow, because Glasgow today and wherever you might live tomorrow, and then we'll see how maybe this all pans out in the future. Where's this all heading to? Because they're building out an infrastructure for something, and I'll be asking Pippa her take on that. So we'll be back after these short messages. Don't go anywhere. Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen. Hour number 2 on today's Kev Baker show with our very special guest, Pippa King. And we're talking about the surveillance state, 5G, Smart City Glasgow. And I'm looking at the chat room. It's absolutely jumping in there today. And myself and Pippa were saying during the break, even if we can get one parent to think differently about that homework app that Billy or Jilly took home just the other day, then that for us is what it's all about, because the very least any of us can do is try to raise awareness about this issue that affects all of us. And even the most tech-savvy, anti-social media person out there, the sad reality is that there's still a digital profile being made on you. And everyone has been affected by this big data. And big data is something that smart cities just absolutely churn out minute after minute. And here I am in Smart City Glasgow, Pippa. It's almost like some kind of universal irony that I find myself in the middle of the digital beast. Now, one thing I have noticed when looking into the smart city here is that when you read into the CCTV, they've got things called avatars, stuff like that. Could you explain what that means? Because I've got this kind of idea in my mind where they've got almost a digital profile of us that follows us around anytime we're seen on one of these cameras.
Well, yeah, and this advanced video analytics, it says, I don't understand this. So the Smart City Glasgow, I think this is page 3 or something, it says avatar. If no image is available, why would an image not be available if somebody's missing in a city? Surely the cameras have picked them up. Anyway, an avatar can be created of the description, which once completed can be put into the system for possible matches. So I'm guessing it's almost like a cartoon of somebody maybe wearing a yellow coat or glasses. I don't understand what that is, and certainly when I got this sort of operational manual back from Glasgow, I've scribbled all over it with a whole load of other questions.
How cool is that? I'm probably just
I'll send another one.
Just marked as a guy with a question mark. That'd be so cool.
Yeah. So you've got it there. Okay. So, but one of the things a smart city does is, one of the things a smart city does in Glasgow, or it did in Glasgow, it was testing or trialing technology in social housing. So one of the instances that one of the councillors in Glasgow City Council gave, it was saying how this smart city is great because we can look at old age people and look into social housing, and we can tell when they've had a bath and then what temperature the water was. Well, just in case somebody's going to burn themselves, are we going to regulate tap temperature now? And so I felt quite sorry really, because I thought these people probably don't have any choice in this. And just because you're either vulnerable or you've not got as much money as somebody doesn't need to be in social housing, does that give the council the right to snoop on how much bath water you've got and what temperature it is and what time you're taking a bath? It's bad. But then because it can, it does. And we've got a similar sort of thing going on in Australia, and not this is part of the smart city, but certainly, different databases are linking up. If you've not had a kids vaccinated, you're not going to get your social housing benefit or whatever it is. So smart cities, but smart for who? And the smart city in Glasgow also has, I've written it down on the back of here because I did a presentation up there a couple of years ago. It also has the capacity to listen into people's conversations. Now, the guys at Glasgow City Council say, oh, well, we've got all these microphones on lampposts just to see if there's a gunshot in the city or to see if there's an accident. We're living in one of the most connected times. As soon as anything like that happens, people phone 999 on a phone they've got in their pocket. So
I know Glasgow's a bit wild, but we're not having gunfights every second night,
I know, but that's not. I think the point is that they're just listening all the time. So it's like you've got Lexas built into certain lampposts over there. It's called Ubotica, and I think it's Open Glasgow. Has a website called Open Glasgow, which is about the smart city. So I got all the data off there. So if you go poking around, there's an awful lot more going on, than sort of meets the eye. So you're being visually recorded, audio recorded, you're having your biometrics. So bio means life and metric means measure. And regardless of whether it's an avatar or pixel recognition, that system is measuring you. It's measuring your face, your coat, your beard, how you walk. It might look at your gait and start to follow you. Now, if people want to know what Glasgow Smart Cities video analytics looks like, if you go onto YouTube, this company that's providing the system is NICE, NICE, which stands for Neptune Intelligence Computer Engineering, and it's an Israeli securities company set up in 1986 by 7 ex-army colleagues, Israeli colleagues. And they have a video, it's called Suspect Search, even though the council will say, oh, no, we're looking for missing children. It's called Suspect Search. You're looking for suspects. This is what the package bought. And they have got a 2 or 3 minute promotional video on Suspect Search. And it looks exactly, you could almost run it as the intro and titles for Persons of Interest that was on Netflix. That was, I don't know if anybody's seen that, but it's all about an artificial intelligence system that's throwing up potential victims and potential crime perpetrators. I mean, this is what Minority Report was doing, sort of predictive policing 20 years ago, and it just softens us up to the possibility that this sort of system can be used on us. And so smart cities, Glasgow, hopefully this particular tracking system isn't turned on yet. And I don't think Glasgow City Council can get it to fit existing data protection and privacy legislation over here.
There's a lot of talk about facial recognition right now. I mean, I think one gentleman was taking one of the police constabularies to court, right? Because his face had been captured and it was like a landmark case. I'm not sure how it went, but that's a really hot topic right now because our faces are captured. And when do we ever give consent for that? We're just going out for a walk. We're not harming anyone. We're not committing crimes. But there we are, right onto CCTV right away.
Absolutely. No, that's the guy in South Wales. So South Wales Police, the Metropolitan Police in London, are the two police forces prolifically using live on-the-ground sort of facial recognition. And this guy, Ed, I think he's called Ed Bridges, and it's with an organisation called Liberty. They're bringing, I don't know if it's court case or a judicial review onto the ethics of whether or not his privacy was being breached, which obviously I think it probably was, because they're taking his photograph and keeping everybody's photograph that walked past the cameras. But the point I think he was making was this: it said facial recognition on the van. This is, but by the time he'd gone up to the van and seen that it was using facial recognition, he had no choice in it because he'd already been facially recognised. And so I asked this question to the Met Police because they're using the same system, and in summer 2017 I got invited behind the scenes with the Met Police to have a look at exactly the same system. They were using it at Notting Hill Carnival, which is a big Black Afro-Caribbean carnival celebration, and thousands of people go. Now, the one thing facial recognition detection isn't very good at is the darker the skin gets, the less the salient points that are picked up in between your nose and your mouth can be seen just because of the light, basically. So the Met Police were keen to say, well, we've not bought this, we've not spent any of the public's money on it, we're just trialing it for, it was NEC, Japanese company. Well, yeah, I bet they were trialing it. They were trying to get it to work better, I think, personally. The Met Police didn't say so, on the one thing that it can't do very well, which is identify people with darker skins. So they took it to the one carnival in UK where there were thousands of people that had, darker skin than us Caucasian people. So it was learning from them. I think that's appalling. And it was clunky. And so this is what is happening in the UK. So yes, Ed is with Liberty, pardon me, taking South Wales Police to task for using their facial recognition. I'm not certain at what point that particular case is at, though I think that it's underway and it has started. So it'll be interesting to see, because we have no legislation in this country to do with facial recognition. The only biometric legislation we've got is the Protection of Freedoms Act, which, me and other parents were responsible for. Anybody over 18 out of the education system is fair game, according to our legislative system.
And of course, most of us have given up our facial recognition when we were tagging ourselves on Facebook and things like that, when that was a novelty way back at the start. Mm-hmm. We trained the AI with those security questions, the ones where you've got to, like, which ones of these have got traffic signs in or got a car in, and you pick the right ones. All of that, we've been training it up ourselves. And I want to ask you, where's this leading to? And you mentioned China earlier on in the show, and we see this horrendous social credit system and scoring that happens over there. Now, we're going into the land of speculation. I get that, Pippa. But do you fear that all of this has been built out for just that very kind of system?
I think it is, but whether or not it will be achieved is another thing. People are wising up. I know people that have got Alexas in their home that they've now switched off because they've sort of thought, it's a bit creepy that, it is actually used as a spy device. Children and parents are getting wise to the use of biometrics in schools. The smart meter for gas and electricity in this country has been hugely unsuccessful. The government's and the energy companies have had to make hundreds of people, engineers, redundant because people just simply aren't taking up smart meters. So the whole sort of surveillance and health aspect with remote devices talking to each other is really becoming quite a hot topic, and so it should. We should be holding companies and people that govern us to account. They should be transparent about what they've got coming down the line for us. So where is it going to go? I think we can look to China, and also I do think that the softening of the next generation to this tech, we should really wake up to, because if it doesn't happen in our lifetime, which I don't think it will, there's a very big danger of the next generation thinking they're reliant on tech, when actually, we're all human. We should trust our guts and have a conversation with people face to face, get out in the sunshine, get away from the blue light of a computer screen or a telephone. And in actual fact, there are schools in the States that are detaching themselves from tech, which is great news. That's an amazing news for the kids in those schools. If you go to my Twitter feed, which is biometrics in schools or Pippa_King, you'll see I've tweeted a couple of articles there. And there's also a petition in Ireland where parents are petitioning schools to get rid of tech. So maybe there's some hope for the next generation that we won't drag them into this Orwellian world that we seem to be glibly sort of stumbling into. It's almost like boiling a frog. It's bit by bit. But like you said, if our parents were told 30 years ago that we'd all be putting cameras and listening devices in our homes in the form of a phone or a Alexa or a Nest or whatever it is, a CCTV camera, then they'd have gone berserk. And I think we're just so complacent. At the moment, is government good? It seems like it's good, but you only need to get some really bad eggs in charge, and all this data could be used in a very nefarious way.
And just look at what's happening. Yeah, in the last couple of days, I'm not sure if you're aware of the whole Project Veritas and the whistleblower that came from Google. We're now talking about these tech companies that literally, and they openly talk about being above governments to the point
Yeah.
where they will literally choose who becomes king next. And, whether it's politics, whether it's any topic out there at all, these search engines, and that's all it used to be, Google, a search engine, but they're literally changing our thoughts, which subtly changes our behaviors. And that in itself, I mean, the level of kind of intrusion into our lives now, it beggars belief. I said it was horrendous earlier on. Somebody in the chat said that's a good word for it. And it is, it's utterly horrendous.
It isn't. It's really interesting because, yeah, I did catch that video, and they were sort of saying we're not going to let anybody like Trump get re-elected again, and of course they want people in power that's going to ensure that their survival is always sort of always there. But I mean, it's governments are at it as well, and the UK government has a nudge department. We've been at this for over a decade, and so good we are, the UK government, at nudging its population that we go abroad and teach other governments how to do it. I think last year we went over to Australia and they wanted to know how to nudge their population. So off we went and taught them. Our government was quite happily to. So we do have to, we're being played. I think there's a danger of us being played, and we need to sort of take back a bit of our power and not gazing at tech screens and leaving this, personal digital exhaust behind us that can, assumptions can be made about us. Is really prudent. I think going tech free, I think, would be great. I mean, I can do that. It's quite difficult.
I was
But,
challenging the audience just last week, and I'm as guilty as anyone. Some people, it might sound like we take the moral high ground when we speak on shows about tech and things, but I'm as bad as anyone.
yeah,
And I've told people, just turn your phone off and then see how long it is before you really start to feel agitated, like you might be missing something. Because that then is showing you that you've got a dopamine addiction.
yeah,
Because we
yeah.
know that these apps and everything else are designed to release dopamine. That's why we get that warm and fuzzy feeling, and we keep coming back for more. To the point now in sleep studies, people are actually cradling a phone that isn't even there.
Oh,
So,
gosh. And there's been some reports of 3, 4, really young children being addicted to iPads. There was
yeah.
a really interesting article about, I think it was 2017, just at Christmas, about how they try and sort of go cold turkey with 3 and 4-year-olds. And I've seen it. You try to take a phone off a young child, and they suddenly something happens. They turn into
They're demonically possessed. They need an exorcism.
But it's very difficult to do that because in society there's screens in shop windows, advertising. It's really difficult. So got to be so careful with the next generation, because if you're getting them hooked at that sort of age, they're not going to come off it, are they? It's quite frightening. We need to be really mindful of what we're actually teaching the next generation. But I mean, I have a situation where I go away for weekends, and I'm in a place where there's barely any telephone signal, and actually it's really nice not to have my phone working. I mean, there's a whole stack of stuff for me to come back to on a Monday, but it's so nice.
No, when I got home to north of Inverness, I mean, Dingwall, it's a small town, but because I'm coming from smart city Glasgow, where you're absorbing this energy, frequencies, everywhere you go, going up there, it's almost like an alien world. It's just a totally different feeling. That you're not aware of the buzz and the hum of what's going on with this tech around you until you're removed from it. And of
Yeah.
course, all of this, we've got the 5G satellites going up. There's going to come a stage where you just can't escape this technology anywhere.
I don't. It's quite frightening. I think apart from the surveillance aspect of things, the most immediate thing that worries me about 5G is the health benefits on not just us but the whole environment. I think, and also, health benefit, not health benefits, health effects, but also as well, we've already got health effects from 4G and Wi-Fi. Why do we need any more? We don't need any more. We need less. So yeah, I think just to be aware that this 5G is not at all in any way, shape or form for our benefit. It's for smart cities, which is essentially a surveillance grid. So they might wrap it up in the green agenda, and which I'm sure is a good side effect of a smart city, but it's not the I would suggest it's not the absolute sort of initial reason why we're getting 5G.
Absolutely. Now, before I let you go, for any parent out there who might feel inspired by what they've heard today, much like you did back when you went to get things changed, I mean, where can people go? What's the first kind of step for people?
So I've got a blog called Biometrics in Schools, which is, I think, pippaking.blogspot.com. There's againstrfidinschools.com. So in UK, we're not using radio frequency devices because I was such a pain in the ass to the school that did it. They switched it off. Anyway, I just left my blog there in case any other school thought it was a good idea to do the same thing. But certainly in the States, they use active tracking chips. And a website called State of Surveillance, which is sort of generally about sort of surveillance on a larger scale. There's an article there about the millimeter microwave scanning that they were going to test in a Texas school. So if you're interested in that, that's sort of there. There's also an amazing website that another parent set up called Defend Digital Me. She's a mum that's really concerned, and she's the one that's done all the research on the homework apps and the school stuff. So Defend Digital Me, I'm going to say .com, but it could be .co.uk. But she's also on Twitter, Defend Digital Me. So if you're concerned about the homework and sort of ed tech side of things in schools, that would be the website to go to. And she's in touch with different groups that are concerned about this also in the States. So, but she's amazing. She was just a mum that wanted to. I started to ask the school about the data that they had on her child, and the department she pulled the thread on the jumper and found that the Department of Education every year, every 3 months, actually every term, collects over 400 different data fields on every single child in the UK, slides it onto something called the National Pupil Database, and they give that information away to ed tech companies, journalists in raw form. So she was horrified and set up Defend Digital Me about 5 or 6 years ago, and with a view to the Department of Education at least encrypting data it sends out and limiting the level of data it sends out. Names, addresses, 400 fields, mental, physical, health, school attainment, what their record, their attendance, why they're ill. And so she went to the Department of Education and gave them a subject access request and said, I want to see with the data that you're holding on my child. And they went, nope, I'm not going to give it you. It's like, what? Well, apparently, under the Data Protection Act at the time, and as I understand it still now, if data is held for research or statistical purposes, the person whose data that is about doesn't have hasn't got a right to see it. So assumptions like, is your child at risk because it's, looking a bit weak or feeble or under the weather or going through a bit of a hormonal change, or is the homework coming in consistently late, might be flagged on a school database, dragged across to DFE, and somehow now that's on a government record, and you don't know about that. So she set up Defend Digital Me, and she's absolutely determined to hold the government to account on the data they hold on children. And through that sort of journey for her, she found out that it wasn't just the government, it was all these homework and ed tech companies that were collecting data as well. So that's a fantastic website to go to if you're concerned about that. So it's defenddigitalme.com, I think.
Well, this has been brilliant, Pippa. It's been great having you back on the show. We'll need to get you back on a lot sooner than the gap we left this time. And hopefully, you'll be speaking to even bigger TED Talks after we speak next time. No more.
I'm emotionally scarred by it. It was an amazing experience, but I've got my brain back after 8 weeks of constantly going through the talk in my head, so I quite like the brain space I've got now.
Well, you've done absolutely brilliant. You really did. I might even play some of that after the break, after you leave. But thank you so much for joining me today. And let's keep in touch. And I'm sure with Smart City Glasgow and Smart City everywhere, there's going to be a lot more for us to talk about in the months to come.
Well, thank you so much. I'm very grateful for you having me on, Kevin.
No problem, Pippa. I will let you go now. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.